You probably won't find a single person today who has never heard of Star Wars or Star Trek, even if they are not sci-fi nerds. The impact of those two franchises has transcended all bounds of cinema. But do you know that some of the most visually impressive space operas exist beyond those two universes? Think of the same sense of adventure, action, and intergalactic drama, minus the lightsabers. If you are as obsessive about sci-fi as I am, then chances are you already know about a few names that I will discuss in this video. But if you are just a movie buff who cannot get enough of space, allow me to take you on a ride through the stars. Some of these are classics, some are very underrated, and some had the potential to be much bigger. Either way, I am sure that they will change how you look at science fiction. Dune, 2021 and 2024. Dune is placed at the top of our list because, well, not doing that would basically be a crime. This is the crowning glory of space opera movies that are neither Star Wars nor Star Trek. Except for a few very devoted fans who are already familiar with the books and the earlier adaptations, I think everyone else who went to watch this in theaters pretty much just saw Zendaya, Timothée Chalamet, and Rebecca Ferguson listed on the poster and decided to give it a shot. And then they thanked their lucky stars for doing the same, because if they came for the A-list cast, they stayed for the story, the world building, the visual effects, the music, and everything else. Denis Villeneuve pretty much made the impossible happen like it was no big deal. Having read Frank Herbert's original work, I cannot imagine how massive a task it must have been to adapt it to the big screen with this kind of elegance. David Lynch had tried it, and I liked the surrealist tone, but overall, it was just not good cinema. I mean it when I say that the only other movie series that took me to a whole other world with this kind of intensity was The Lord of the Rings. The third Villeneuve Dune film, Dune Part 3, is currently scheduled for a December 18, 2026 release, and the stakes are higher than ever. With Robert Pattinson joining the saga and Anya Taylor-Joy returning in a much bigger Alia Atreides role, Villeneuve has set the stage for a fantastic continuation of this cinematic trilogy. I can go on for hours about every aspect of Dune that I have loved, but if I had to single out the top 3 things I liked best, they would include the cinematography, the world building, and the score. It might sound odd to include the music in this lineup, but you cannot change my mind that the overall sensory experience would have been significantly muted had it not been for Hans Zimmer. Many people have criticized the films, but I truly feel that this is because these movies are set to a standard we would not even imagine setting for most other movies, you know? It is not a perfect adaptation because books and films are inherently different, and everything written is nearly impossible to adapt in the truest way. Maybe it is paced slowly, too, but that is because it is not your average superhero flick filled with adrenaline. Some movies require us to sit and be patient without expecting easy thrills. Just in case you have not watched the first and second films yet, there is still time before December. You will not regret this one. The Fifth Element, 1997. I remember one review of The Fifth Element on IMDb stated how it should be used as an example in film school about how to make good cinema, and I could not agree more. This is the complete package. It is the kind of movie that will leave you excited from the thrill and breathless from all the laughing. This is one of Luc Besson's best films because the amount of excellence he managed to pack into little over 2 hours is truly a case study in directorial work. It is not your typical space opera with blood and gooey things where the humans suddenly manage a last-second victory. It is bizarre in the best way possible, with the comedy being very unique, and to not even get me started on the cast. Gary Oldman, Mila Jovovich, and Bruce Willis? Everyone did a fantastic job bringing their characters to life. Not one scene feels like wasted fluff. I have lost count of just how many times I have watched this movie, and every time it gives me the same amount of satisfaction. The storytelling, visual effects, costumes, courtesy of the one and only Jean-Paul Gaultier and Eric Serra's music all come together to create a brilliant, genre-blending epic. So, pointing out the flaws is just being too picky in this case, but if I had to settle on one, that would be Chris Tucker's acting. But again, that is me being very, very picky. I will recommend this to people who love sci-fi but do not want something on an epic level like Dune, which needs them to sit with it to really understand what is happening. Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014. Marvel's very own space opera is sometimes underdiscussed compared to the Avengers films, in my opinion, because people just enjoy the glitz and glam of the Avengers more. I'm not comparing the two in any way. I just feel that because the mainstream Avengers movies take up so much of the limelight, people do not always realize just how well done Guardians of the Galaxy was. James Gunn took some underdog-esque Marvel characters and gave them their own movies. And all those characters are just weird, but he managed to weave them perfectly into the universe's fabric by not overlooking their quirks, but by infusing them with personality that encourages those same quirks. There's a reason why I Am Groot is one of the most famous one-liners in the MCU, right up there with, and I am Iron Man, and he means get lost, Squidward. Funny how they are both Tony Stark lines. Guess you now know who my favorite Avenger is. Anyway, back to Guardians of the Galaxy. I cannot help but notice how the initial concept art was very reminiscent of Star Wars, with serious overtones. But when I saw the film, I was very impressed by how light-hearted it was without ever stepping into slapstick territory. A movie with a talking raccoon and a tree cannot really be all that serious, of course. But very importantly, and this is something the critics conveniently do not touch on, none of the space action we saw in Infinity War and Endgame would have made sense without the foundation that Guardians of the Galaxy provided. Sure, the Thor, Captain Marvel, and Doctor Strange films certainly played a part, but they cannot exactly be termed as space operas. I am glad that Marvel let Gunn helm this, because it would not have been close to being a blockbuster had it been anyone else. Serenity, 2005. Canceling Firefly so unceremoniously after airing only 11 of the 14 produced episodes is something Fox will never live down, and we better not stop reminding them either. A few years after the show's cancellation, the Firefly cast returned on the big screen with Serenity. It was an extension of the show in some way, with many fans referring to it as a 2-hour-long episode. Arguably, this is the one movie on our list that did not satisfy people enough, but it still has a sprawling fandom that is just as passionate as any other. The unique and enjoyable mix of a Han Solo-inspired character with a Star Trek-inspired structure birthed a true Wild West sci-fi genre mashup that most space operas can only dream of being. Serenity embraced all the aspects that made us so interested in Firefly: well-written characters, sharp wit, and fantastic storytelling. Being a movie, it also had the added advantage of a higher budget that worked well for special effects and better choreographed action sequences. It gave Firefly enthusiasts much-needed closure through its epic battle scenes, completely unexpected twists, and a good amount of emotional anguish. After all, I know most of us are not able to hold back from shedding at least one tear whenever we hear, "I'm a leaf on the wind, watch how I soar." This one sentence combines the beauty and tragedy in this movie that has been burned into the memory of every fan. If you know, you know, and if you do not, I suggest you set aside time this weekend for your upcoming binge. Flash Gordon, 1980. People will tell you Flash Gordon is a cheesy, boring film. They will say that a football player going to space to defend the planet makes no sense. Well, we don't call it science fiction for nothing, right? I do not agree with the aforementioned description of the movie. Cheesy inherently denotes something inelegant, done in a rush, with no semblance of coherence. Flash Gordon is none of those things because Mike Hodges knew what he was doing. All the over-the-top and flamboyant performances are there by design. It is a 1930s comic strip brought to life on the big screen. I remember reading about how a fan called it the love child of Star Wars and the original Batman TV show. And as weird as that sounds, that is exactly what this is. You will find a lot of action, a lot of vintage comic book campiness, and Queen handling the soundtrack. It is an experience that simply cannot be put into words. Unlike most other space opera films of this time, Flash Gordon focused on sets and costumes more than visual effects, which certainly adds to the cheesy allegations. It had a more complicated box office story, modest in North America, but remembered with much stronger cult affection in the UK. Those guys know how to take humor with a pinch of salt, you know? If you start watching it expecting a well-rounded thriller with lots of twists and turns and some poetic justice, then this is not going to be your cup of tea. But if you go in with an open mind to just enjoy a funny movie without going full critic mode and micro-analyzing everything, you are going to have a wonderful time, and it will quickly climb to the top of your guilty pleasure watch list.
Look, a complement of implosion missiles onto the Protector.
Galaxy Quest, 1999. When one sees Tim Allen, Alan Rickman, and Sigourney Weaver headlining a movie, one does not ask questions. One simply hits the play button or walks into the theater, whichever is one's poison of choice. I know how Galaxy Quest is often called discount Star Trek, but as funny as that sounds, it does not do justice to what a phenomenon this movie is. It starts off as a blasphemous parody of Gene Roddenberry's brilliant franchise, and then transitions into one of the hardiest space opera films ever made. It is right up there with The Fifth Element in terms of how well the genre mashing was done, combining sci-fi, comedy, and action themes to create an endlessly rewatchable and imaginative film. There is a certain adjective I do not use for a lot of shows and/or movies because I believe they can be great, exceptional even, but it takes a special something for them to be called charming. I know of religiously devoted Star Trek fans who dove into this movie with the vigor of a furious reformer so that they could write detailed reviews about how much it sucked and why Star Trek rules, only to end up enjoying every minute and applauding the effort of everyone involved. The premise of the film is basically one of those what-if questions, which wonder how William Shatner and the cast of Star Trek would behave if they were brought into space by actual aliens who think the actors are real-life characters. The comedy is concentrated mostly in the first half of the film and is toned down significantly after that, and that is the point where you will come across one of the most thoughtful and well-written space opera battle sequences in the history of cinema. Call it Star Trek on steroids all you want, this is a brilliant movie, and there will be no Galaxy Quest slander under my roof. Starship Troopers, 1997. This is for all the ones gunning for more action and sci-fi, pun intended. Beyond the brilliant visual effects and adrenaline-spiking action scenes, Starship Troopers is an excellent commentary on fascism. It is so good that you will almost forget that it is satirical. You have a team of gun-happy soldiers, a love triangle, and the ever-unchanging threat to humanity all in one film, directed with a lot of thought and heart. That was the man Paul Verhoeven was. He could create mainstream popcorn flicks, as well as very compelling thought pieces. For good or bad, this very approach was what affected this movie at the box office, because like I said, it was made so astutely that many people just did not get what was being conveyed. The director ended up being labeled as a fascist himself by some viewers and critics, and his commentary on the DVD had to be resorted to in order to clarify what the intentions of the filmmakers were. It is extravagant, violent, dystopian, and has a lot of blood that will appeal to all the adrenaline junkies for sure. I will also agree that the performance of the cast could have been better, but that is what you get for going with soap opera stars who are pretty and can ace wooden roles. But even if that is supposed to be a caricature, because the world we are presented with in the movie is seemingly perfect, with everyone looking great, but only at the surface level. I remember watching Starship Troopers as a kid and genuinely enjoying the action because I was unable to comprehend anything else at that time. So when I rewatched it as an adult, I simply wanted a second taste of that excessive violence. But I was left with a very keen understanding of the subliminal themes, and I have to say that it feels better as well as more disturbing with every subsequent watch. The Last Starfighter, 1984. Man, this one brings back such fond memories. While it was completely inspired by Star Wars and did not hit the targets the studio had set for, it was something every teenager became obsessed with. We saw ourselves in Alex, because all of us grew up pumping quarters into arcade games. People are usually harsh with their criticism of this one because they expected it to be the next Star Wars. The effects look dated now, but historically, the film was important for pushing computer-generated space visuals. Kids today will not appreciate this because they are so used to watching polished CGI, and The Last Starfighter will just come across as cheesy. But to so many of us, it was never about being a critically or commercially successful film. It simply was an escape that allowed us to put ourselves in Alex's shoes, hoping that we would get whisked across the galaxy for our personal adventure. Even if the storyline is shaky and the parallels are a bit too obvious at times, this movie was made with a lot of heart, and that is why it is so nostalgic. If you have kids, or younger siblings who are slowly starting to appreciate sci-fi, it is a good idea to have some family bonding time watching this film on a nice Friday night. Forbidden Planet, 1956. This is one of the OG big-screen space operas that inspired countless subsequent movies and shows, including Star Trek and, indirectly, later sci-fi cinema like Star Wars. It is a legacy item at this point. It is one of the foundational big-screen space operas, and its influence on later sci-fi, especially Star Trek, is impossible to ignore. I underestimated it when I watched it for the first time, because I naively assumed it would be in tune with other 1950s sci-fi movies that we know of, cheesy and underwhelming. And boy, did I have to eat my words, because I guarantee you the feeling I experienced watching it on my TV made me very aware of just how amazing it would have been to the audiences back then who had watched it in theaters. The detail that went into every aspect of the script is insane. It is not one of those hyper-futuristic movies where you have a couple of cars flying around to emphasize how much technology has progressed. The juice lies in the smaller details, such as the set design for Dr. Morbius's laboratory. As someone who has read and watched an ungodly amount of science fiction, there are times I wish we had shows, movies, and books that allowed us to think for ourselves instead of spelling everything out, leaving no room for imagination. Forbidden Planet dealt with pretty intense psychological themes that made me pause at times because I needed to comprehend what was happening. It is cinema made for thinkers, for people who like to draw their own conclusions instead of being happy with what the director has decided on. It predicts the end of humankind in a truly tragic but practical manner, so if you are expecting a lot of adrenaline and a satisfying climax, you may feel this film is boring. And I must apologize to R2-D2 and C-3PO while saying this, but no robot has come close to beating Robbie in terms of personality. This movie is criminally underrated, and I really wish every sci-fi nerd out there would give it at least one watch. Not a lot of films, especially within this genre, will make you question the limits of human progress the way this one will.
They have is an old weather ship.
Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. Another post-Star Wars B-movie space adventure that did not do as well as expected, Battle Beyond the Stars is funny, exciting, and one of those films you can watch while turning your brain off. This Roger Corman production is also famous for one more reason. It is one of the earliest works of James Cameron in special effects. This movie is basically Seven Samurai by way of the Magnificent Seven launched into space. While the original is widely lauded as one of the best films ever made, Battle Beyond the Stars unfortunately missed the mark on most aspects. The performance of the cast is not bad, but it is very obvious that Sybil Danning's presence and very questionable costume was meant to distract audiences from some of the more glaring flaws of the movie. It was very clearly made by and for young men. Of course, this was not a big-budget production to begin with, so we cannot really fault it too much for not being on the same level as Star Wars. The set design and space battles are fun to watch, keeping in mind the time period. There are many lighthearted moments throughout the script as well, so it never breaches the serious, thought-provoking territory. It is very clearly a B film, so manage your expectations if you are thinking of giving it a try. You will laugh, be entertained, and maybe stare too long at Danning, and then forget about it. I will not give further opinions on this because I know that will divide a section of you, so why don't you let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about Battle Beyond the Stars. To sum up, Star Wars and Star Trek will always remain the crowning jewels in the sci-fi space opera Hall of Fame. But if those are the only two franchises people are limiting themselves to, there's so much they are missing out on. The movies I discussed here prove that this genre has a much bigger range than we typically imagine. It is not always hostile aliens and exploring new civilizations. Some of these have their fair share of drama and emotional moments that will pack a punch and leave you wheezing out of laughter or struggling to hold back tears. So pick one of these that you have not watched and make a movie night out of it. There are a few other honorable mentions that have not made it to the list, but are just as nostalgic and exciting. For example, Ender's Game is not a very good adaptation, but has one of the best twists in probably all of science fiction. Then you have Disney's Treasure Planet that somehow everyone sleeps on, which is basically Pirates of the Caribbean if the Caribbean were space. And the underdog of the underdogs is Space Sweepers, the South Korean film starring Song Joong-ki, often described as South Korea's first major space blockbuster. Combining the style and wit of Serenity with Guardians of the Galaxy, this is one movie that only an infuriatingly small number of fans know about. There you go. I just added 3 more names unofficially. And for what it's worth, if one of your personal favorites did not make it, drop it in the comments. Space is infinite, and you better believe I am ready to take the plunge. If you know of anyone who appreciates content like this, please share our channel with them. We are a growing family, and I would love to have more of my fellow nerds here. I will be back with another deep dive very soon, so stay tuned.